All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to the Explainer. I absolutely love dissecting how one tiny, seemingly harmless mistake can ripple out and completely rewrite the rules of the game. And I gotta tell you, today's topic is an absolute classic. We are looking at a story of high-stakes corporate acquisitions, a dramatic stock market plunge, and a monumental legal battle that fundamentally changed global corporate law forever. This is the story of Caparo Industries versus Dickman, or, as it's better known, simply the Caparo case. To really grasp why this case shook the financial world, we have to start right here. 1.7 million pounds. That is the massive discrepancy at the very heart of our story. See, a company's accounts were officially certified as showing a perfectly healthy pre-tax profit of 1.3 million pounds. But in reality, the company was just bleeding cash. They were suffering an actual loss of over 400,000 pounds. That 1.7 million pound swing? Well, actually, scratch that. It isn't just an accounting error. It's a million-pound mistake that lured a corporate predator straight into a trap.
Let's trace how unbelievably fast this all went down back in 1984. In March, the target company issues a profit warning. Then in May, their auditors inexplicably approve accounts showing that shiny 1.3 million pound profit. By June, relying entirely on those audited numbers, Caparo Industries starts aggressively buying up shares. And by October, their takeover is successful, and they own the whole company outright. But shortly after, Caparo realizes they've basically bought a sinking ship. So how exactly does a single bad spreadsheet change the law forever? Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the fidelity takeover. 2, the million-pound mistake. 3, the proximity problem. 4, the three-part Caparo test. And finally, 5, the final verdict. All right, part 1, the fidelity takeover. The target company we're talking about here is Fidelity plc, which was an electrical equipment manufacturer traded on the London Stock Exchange, and their auditors, the highly respected firm Touche Ross. You can literally see the drama unfolding right here in Fidelity's share price. Back in March 1984, the shares were sitting comfortably at 143 pence. But when word got out that profits were going to fall short of predictions, the price absolutely tanked, hitting just 63 pence by June. For a corporate predator like Caparo Industries, this sudden vulnerability was like blood in the water. They saw an undervalued company, aggressively bought up the shares, and eventually made a successful bid for the whole operation, which drove the price back up to 125 pence by October. Moving on to part 2, a million-pound mistake. Now, Caparo didn't just guess that Fidelity was a good buy. They relied explicitly on those audited accounts released in June. They fully trusted the official paperwork. But those audited accounts were essentially a disastrous fiction. Just look at the metrics here. The auditors, Touche Ross, were negligent. They significantly overvalued Fidelity's stock and severely underprovided for after-sales credits. And these accounting errors completely masked Fidelity's true financial disaster. So instead of a 400,000 pound loss, the books showed a 1.3 million pound profit. Caparo looked at these numbers, bought the company, and suddenly found themselves holding a massive, incredibly expensive bag. Naturally, they decided to sue the auditors.
Which brings us to the absolute core legal dilemma of this entire explainer. If an auditor makes a mistake, who exactly has the right to sue them? Because remember, Caparo wasn't the company that hired the auditors. They were just an outside investor, a market predator, really, who read a public report and acted on it.
This sets up a massive clash of legal philosophies. On one side, you have Caparo arguing that auditors owe a duty of care to potential investors and individual shareholders who rely on those public accounts to go out and buy shares. On the flip side, the defense forcefully argued that the statutory duty of an auditor is strictly to the existing shareholders as a collective body, solely so they can oversee the management of the company. Which leads us to part 3, the proximity problem, or finding the duty of care. In English law, to sue someone for negligence, you have to prove they owed you a duty of care. And to do that, you must prove a relationship of proximity. To really get this, we have to rewind to a famous 1932 case called Donahoe versus Stevenson. Lord Atkin delivered this legendary rule. You must take reasonable care to avoid acts or omissions which you can reasonably foresee would be likely to injure your neighbor. In the eyes of the law, your neighbor is anyone so closely and directly affected by your act that you ought reasonably to have them in mind. So how does that build into the definition of proximity? Well, proximity isn't necessarily about physical closeness.
It's the closeness and directness of the relationship between the party making the mistake and the party suffering the damage. Now, we have to make a really crucial distinction here. That older case, Donahue versus Stevenson, that was about a defective bottle of ginger beer that caused physical illness. Think about it. If you make an exploding bottle, it only hurts the one who drinks it. The damage stops right there. But a bad spreadsheet? Pure economic loss caused by written words? Words are volatile. As the House of Lords noted, they travel fast and far afield. A single negligent financial statement could be read by thousands of people, causing vast financial damage to strangers the auditor has never even met. You simply cannot apply the exploding ginger beer rule to a bad spreadsheet.
And that takes us to part 4, the 3-part Caparo test. Because of this exact danger, the House of Lords realized they desperately needed to set a limit on who can sue for economic loss.
To establish a duty of care, you now must pass these 3 distinct steps. First, foreseeability of damage. Was it reasonably foreseeable that the defendant's carelessness would cause damage? Second, a relationship of proximity. Was there a sufficiently close and direct relationship between the parties? And third, is it fair, just, and reasonable for the law to impose a duty of care in this specific situation? You need all 3 to win your case. Now, why make the test so incredibly strict? Because the judges were terrified of a scenario an American judge Cardozo once warned about. They feared exposing professionals to liability in an indeterminate amount for an indeterminate time to an indeterminate class. Basically, if auditors owed a duty to literally anyone who read their public reports, investors, banks, creditors, they would face uninsurable, limitless risk. It would destroy the entire accounting profession overnight. Finally, Part 5, the final verdict. Did Caparo pass their own test? Did Touche Ross actually owe Caparo a duty of care when they published that disastrously wrong audit? The House of Lords looked really closely at the actual statutory purpose of an annual audit. Why does the law even require it? The primary purpose, they ruled, is to protect the company itself from undetected errors and to provide the collective shareholders with reliable intelligence so they can oversee management. It is emphatically not designed to act as free investment advice for individual members of the public, and it is definitely not meant to guide market predators looking to launch a takeover bid. Because the audit wasn't created for the purpose of Caparo making an investment decision, there was no proximity. And without proximity, there is no duty of care. Caparo completely loses the case. They were left to absorb the massive financial hit of their million-pound mistake entirely on their own. This ruling sent absolute shockwaves through the financial world, and it leaves us with a fascinating, almost unsettling reality to ponder. As investors, we obsess over annual reports and audited accounts to make our market moves, but the law explicitly says those reports aren't strictly meant for us to use as investment guides. And if they're wrong, we can't sue. So I'll leave you with this question. If the audited financial reports we rely on aren't legally meant to guide our investments, on what foundation is the modern stock market truly built? Think about that the next time you're staring down a balance sheet. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the numbers.